This week in Pure Reinvention.
Everybody likes an element of control. And I think when I look back, that's the first time in my life that I really felt that I didn't have control over my family, my life, and it was really hard to get used to at first.
Episode 137, Summer Minnick, Deputy Executive Director and CMO of the Michigan Municipal League.
Engage, disrupt, adapt, repeat. You're listening to Pure Reinvention, the podcast for curious people.
Welcome to this edition of Pure Reinvention, where we create space for the unexpected by inspiring a reinvention lifestyle. We are very fortunate this month to have Bonifer Ballard.
I was really excited to listen to this interview with Summer. She has a really inspiring story, but mostly I loved the lesson that she learned at the end of her story about running.
Summer had such an intriguing and compelling story because when she first told the story to me, at first I was thinking it was going to be a wreck. And as we listen to the story, we find out that there was something very unexpected that happened.
Right.
And I think we lose sight of how important the unexpected is.
Yeah, I really appreciated that she is an accomplished professional, really a go-getter. She just dives in and conquers whatever comes before her. And life decided it was time for her to learn a slightly different lesson. And I love how she embraced it.
Yeah, there's some magic there. So let's listen.
This week's episode is sponsored by HRM Services, providing solutions that work. HRMS provides customized human resource consulting services to fit the unique needs of their clients. Every client has a story, and they make it their business to learn yours. Contact HRM Services today at 517-974-8033 or visit their website at hrmservices.biz.
Today we're here with Summer Minnick. Summer is the newly appointed Deputy Director for the Michigan Municipal League. Summer, first of all, congratulations on your new appointment to Deputy Director. A well-earned responsibility from a leadership standpoint for the league, especially as they're moving into their next phase.
Yes, I'm very excited about it. Thank you so much.
This is only one of the many accomplishments, however, that has fit into your young career. You are a very accomplished distance runner, as well as the mother of 3 children. And it's actually those things today that we wanted to share some of these experiences with our podcast guests, because I think there's some wonderful, wonderful leadership lessons that we can pull out and learn from some of the life experiences that you've had. So I hope you don't mind sharing those with us.
I don't mind at all. It was painful to go through sometimes, but if that can help other people, great.
Well, they will. And the first one, and I want you to kind of go through it really briefly, Summer, but as the mother of 3, the 3 children did not necessarily come exactly as you thought you had planned it, did they?
Oh, no. My husband and I are both from families. There's a 10-year gap in siblings on my end and a 20-year gap on his end. So we sort of expected we'd be on a path like that, just not knowing anything different. And we had one daughter, and right after her first birthday, found out we were having twin daughters less than a year later. And so we ended up with 3 babies in a little over 20 months. And it was quite a whirlwind in how we envisioned our lives going.
For now, as the parent who received the news that you thought you were going to have a second child, only to find out you were going to have child 2 and 3. What goes through your mind when you start to realize that things are not going quite according to plan?
When you're first going through it during pregnancy, and even when they were infants, it wasn't something we were really excited about. And it took a lot of getting used to. And I feel sort of bad admitting that. And obviously I don't feel that way now. It defines my family and we love it. And there's a lot of pros I see to having all your kids at once.
Right.
But at the time, it was quite an adjustment. When I had my first daughter, I've always been very sort of organized and particular. And I remember distinctly every night cleaning her toys in her toy basket when she was an infant and putting them all away every single night. You can imagine 3 babies, it stopped happening. And I was forced out of my traditional pattern of life and being, and had to live in a chaotic environment that I wasn't comfortable with or wanted, quite frankly. Not that I didn't want the 3 daughters that I had, but having them all crawling around at my feet at once was not what I envisioned it would be like, and forced me into a different state of mind with my family.
So you can see Summer has a unique personality in which it's more planned, more organized, more predictable. And sometimes life does not throw us the most predictable of paths. Mm-hmm. And yet you can't imagine your life without those 3 wonderful children. But the way in which they entered the world was a complete surprise. And as you said, very chaotic for a professional who is a more organized and deliberate personality.
Right. I mean, I'm sure everybody likes an element of control. And I think when I look back, that's the first time in my life that I really felt that I didn't have control over my family, my life, and it was really hard to get used to at first. And I probably didn't do it very successfully initially, but you learn a lot along the way, and you have to start laughing at it because there are times when you're completely out of control.
Another more recent example actually happened to you with your marathon training. You're an accomplished marathoner. You are very focused in wanting to hit very specific goals for your marathons during your races. In fact, if I remember right, one of your goals had been to break the 4-hour barrier, which is a wonderful accomplishment. But your most recent race that you ran didn't go exactly like you had predicted either, did it?
No, not at all. In fact, I have a group of women that I run with consistently, and I am lovingly teased for my religious approach to my training. Once I pick a program and decide this is what I'm doing, I do not veer. I always find a way to get runs in, even if it's 10 o'clock at night, 5 in the morning. That has always been the thing that I control. And I feel that if I can control it, I can control the outcome. And I think that that's another hard lesson that's been for me in marathoning. I have done that rigid program several times, and there's been a few times on race day when it didn't go as planned.
There's all sorts of things, but never would you have imagined the series of events that hit in this most recent marathon training, because this was all about you. Mm-hmm.
I've done this a few times, and I sort of recently in the last several years decided to really focus on getting faster. And I hit 4 hours and 30 seconds when I was in Tokyo in 2016. And I was happy because at the time it was a PR, but I couldn't believe that I missed it by 30 seconds. So then I decided I was going to do it. And so I switched and I used the Hanson's marathon method and followed it religiously with the goal of breaking 4 hours at the Philadelphia Marathon last fall at the end of November. And I thought, great timing.
Which would be perfect marathon weather.
Yes, perfect marathon weather. It's the Sunday before Thanksgiving, so I won't feel guilty chowing the week after.
Rebuilding.
Everything felt right about it.
Couldn't have done anything more to be more ready.
Hit every target. In fact, I surpassed every target. And marathon day comes.
The classic overachiever.
Yeah. And we get a massive windstorm that hit here on Saturday, but it hit on marathon day in Philly. And we had sustained winds of 30, 40 miles an hour. And it was unbelievable. And I did the race, and my girlfriend and I were on target through the half, but it took everything to stay on target through the half. In the second half of the race, it was a disaster. And I didn't quite make it to mile 20 before I just stopped. It was a disaster. And I realized
you were not
the day
going
was
to hit
over.
4 hours.
No. But the next week I was so frustrated. I immediately signed up for a spring marathon, and I thought, forget it. I'm doing this again. And I jumped right back in.
So you were basically trying to wipe out that bad experience by replacing it with another good race.
I could not sit on it. I hated it. I was miserable. I was unhappy. I was I was fairly devastated and thought, I'm jumping right back.
So you really needed that race to help you let go, the new race to let go of the old race, which was really bothering you, that
Yes.
you had done all this perfect training and it had not gone well.
Yes. I started doubting whether I was going to do it. And I can't stand that feeling of questioning myself and my abilities. So I threw myself right back into the exact same training program. I even I go beyond. So I didn't train for 3:59. I trained for 3:50. And so I didn't even want to come in close to 4 hours. If I was going to do it, I wanted to really take some time off. From the onset, the sort of opposite happened. Instead of hitting every target, it was a bit of a disaster.
You mean your training?
In my training program. Yeah, it was.
So it was the opposite of your training before, where the training was perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Now your training was not going so well.
It was a disaster from the start. It wasn't just even about my running abilities. I started questioning my girlfriends weren't running for a race in the spring. So that meant I was doing a lot of these runs on my own instead of with my friends, which also makes a difference.
Which is, if you're also running a spring marathon, you're doing a lot of your training in the winter.
In the dead of winter.
Where it's dark and cold.
My hard runs really were hitting in February. So and it's super dark, and I try to be safe. So I had a treadmill in my garage facing the wall. And I did almost all of those runs on that treadmill at between 5 and 6:45 in the morning, facing the wall.
Wow.
Watching Stephen Colbert on my iPhone to try to give me something to distract me, but speed workouts. I mean, twice a week I was doing tempo runs of 10 and 11 miles before I would get ready for work, and
on a treadmill
in the dark, facing a wall. And it took
Sounds
a
like
lot.
fun, right?
Yeah, it was a little crazy, but
You were very focused.
I was focused, but I immediately started having problems with my hamstring, which has been an ongoing nagging injury for years, and it started feeling worse. So my runs weren't feeling good. I was feeling a lot of pain, and I was worried about longer term injury. And because I was doing it at the time I was doing it, I wasn't getting my daughter ready for school. My oldest daughter, she was getting herself ready. So then I started questioning whether
I
was being a good mom, and whether I was going to a bad place with running instead of it being a good thing. It was starting to feel like something I had to do that I didn't have control over anymore, almost like an addiction in a way. But I told myself I would just stick with it, and I was one by one, even though I was in a lot of pain, I was hitting the marks on my runs. And so I thought, I'm just going to keep going and make a day-by-day decision if I was actually going to complete the race. It was the Glass City Marathon in Toledo. And I hadn't really told anybody about it except my husband and my running friends. And so I could easily pull out of the race if need be. And I almost did up until the end.
And then there was a final last nail in your training, wasn't there?
Yeah. I did something I've never, ever done. And I honestly hope I never do again, even though it was a good outcome. I got it was sometime in March, and I started seeing Facebook posts of my friends who were tapering for Boston. And I knew that my race was just a few days after the Boston Marathon. And I thought, tapering? I have weeks I'm not even at my peak yet. And
thinking you still had more long runs to go.
6-7 weeks to go for my race. And all of a sudden, I felt a pit in my stomach because I knew what happened. I was off on my week count.
And not by 1 week.
No, I miscounted way back in January. And instead of having still 6 or 7 more weeks to go, I was supposed to be starting to taper that weekend. And I hadn't even started my peak. I was 3 weeks off.
Which is a lot because those 3 weeks are when you have your longest runs that really build the stamina for your successful marathons. So you had to have been devastated.
I thought, this is
Well, this was the sign that said, apparently I shouldn't. Yeah, apparently this was not a good race for me.
Yeah, I went into it with a bad mentality of.
So your training was off, your schedule was off, your body was responding in a negative way to the hard training. You felt like your family was taking a back seat to all this.
About a week, maybe a week and a half beforehand, I was telling my husband I thought that was it. I just needed to pull the plug. But he said to me, you know you can finish. You've done this a bazillion times. It would be another state. And I've toyed with the idea of running 50 states and this would be my 10th. He said, just go do it. And when you have to walk, it's okay. Just walk and get through it. And I thought that's a good alternative goal. So I actually read about alternative goals because it's not in my nature to give up. I decided I was going to try to keep pace through the half. I drove down the night before the race late. We'd gone to a concert in town. And so I got to the hotel just before midnight, got about 5 hours of sleep, which is not untypical for marathon runners because of typical jitters and whatnot. So that wasn't anything crazy. I got with the 350 pace group and thought, well, I'll just run until I can't do it anymore. I had let go of all my expectations and preconceived outcomes and just decided I was going to just run. I felt fine for a while and then a little while longer. And I struck up a conversation with a guy and that he was running calm and comfortable. And I felt like I just synced right in. I typically run a lot faster than I've ever been able to execute in a marathon. That's been a long, frustrating outcome for me. And I just didn't think about it. I kept running and talking, and the pace felt like it does when I'm at home training. It was comfortable. I didn't feel like I was pushing myself. And
you stopped focusing on the end and you just started enjoying the journey.
I just was taking it as it came. I didn't place those, I think, external stresses on myself for the day. And I hit the halfway part, no problem on target. And then I hit the 30K still with the group on target, and I was still feeling fine and my body felt good. And I kept going and I couldn't believe it. But all of a sudden I started thinking, I think this is going to happen today. It wasn't until about the mile 23 mark that hamstring, you can't deny it for too long. It is your body and it is what it is. And I felt it start to seize up at that point. But I looked at my watch and I realized I was still with the 350 pace at that point, that I was going to break 4 hours. I only had a 5K to go. And at that point, there was no way I was going to let that slip. So I slowed down a little on purpose to help with the hamstring pain. I kept going and I got a little bit faster at mile 25, a little bit faster at mile 26.
The end in sight.
And I couldn't believe it. I crossed that finish line at 3:53:11 was my final time. I still I get emotional thinking about it. Couldn't believe it. I never, ever thought that was going to happen that day. I had such a bad training cycle. It was perfect. It felt wonderful and I felt good basically the whole time. And I think that a large part of that was because I just went and I let it come to me and I didn't try to force it. And I never looked at my watch every mile, which is another first. Usually I'm obsessing every mile.
What a phenomenal story. And there's so many leadership lessons that we'll be able to use with this. But Summer, I want to thank you so much for sharing. Bonifer, I'm sure everyone is going to have some takeaways from this fabulous story that Summer was so kind to share with us.
Yeah, I think anybody who is sort of the classic overachiever will relate to those. Summer got to a place where she finally had to let go of control, and that's a really difficult thing for overachievers or for type A's. Give it whatever label you want. Those people who are highly accomplished have a hard time letting go of control.
Well, let's face it, if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably one of those.
Right.
You're probably one of those people. So
right.
I think for a lot of us who feel like in any project that we get involved with, whether it's personal or professional, it's our energy and our leadership that affect its outcome. And we forget about all the other forces in the world and in the universe, which apparently have a an impact as well.
I thought related to the letting go of control was this idea that preconceived path forward for a project doesn't necessarily lead to the outcomes you think.
Well, and what's interesting about that, Bonifer, is we sometimes forget that in order to really get a major impact, we also have to embrace the trends that are going on around us that are the non-negotiables.
Right.
But the reality is those were forces that were already in the environment or forces that were already in the universe. And we should figure out a way to embrace those and have those be a part of the momentum to help us get where we're going instead of fighting them.
Right. I think her example when her daughters were born so quickly, that was not their original plan, and learning to live within the chaos and be okay with that was a pretty big hurdle for her, which is interesting because I think it prepared her for what she experienced in her run.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think the really magnificent lesson there is your plan isn't always the plan.
Right. Right.
But there was a second point you also picked up that you thought was really, really special.
I thought the idea that if you have she had these preconceived ideas about how to move forward to get a preconceived outcome, and learning that those preconceived ways forward may not necessarily get you to the outcome, and that there are different paths you can take to get to an outcome that you want.
So number one, multiple pathways
Right.
are appropriate, and depending on the reality of the situation kind of determines the pathway. So there isn't just ever one way. And I know this is going to be a really hard one for a lot of leaders to embrace, but the element of surprise that Summer has talked about in the examples that she used were personal. Both produced outcomes that were not a part of her vision. They were a surprise.
Right.
And yet she's not rolling back either of those.
Right.
Because they were so phenomenal in how they moved her ahead.
Right. I think it's interesting. I really relate to a lot of the issues that Summer relayed in her story. When I think professionally, it's definitely a challenge for my organization and my members to deal with surprise. But it's those very things that really energize them and get them excited about the future. So figuring that out, how to introduce the surprise in a way that isn't too scary, and that they can embrace and walk away with some good energy and good ideas.
Think about the element of surprise next time when you're thinking through your executive development and your next growth phase for your business, where the disrupt and the element of surprise may be exactly what you need. So if you're ready for a change, make it a change that lasts. Make it pure reinvention.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pure Reinvention. Keep the conversation going and get alerts when new podcasts are up by following us on Twitter at Pure Reinvention, or sign up for our mailing list at purereinvention.com.